Disclaimer: this video contains sensitive true crime content and is intended for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. It began the way Sundays always did: quiet, predictable, safe. Families pressed into pews, children swinging their legs against the wooden benches, the smell of lemon oil rising from hymnals smoothed by generations of hands. A song had just begun, voices climbing in harmony, when the doors at the back of the chapel opened. At first, no one thought much of it. A latecomer maybe, a man in a dark jacket, head low, slipping into the place where forgiveness was meant to live. But the way he moved, deliberate, heavy, almost hunting, turned a few heads. The soprano note faltered. A mother's hand tightened around her child's wrist, and then it happened. The sound tore through the sanctuary, shredding the hymn in half. Screams rose, pews rattled, and what had been a place of worship turned into a scene of terror. The bishop rose instinctively, stepping toward the chaos with arms outstretched, not to fight, but to plead. By the time his hands reached forward, blood already darkened the carpet beneath him. Two never rose again. Several more clutched at wounds, their prayers colliding with panic. Children wailed, adults froze between fight and flight, and the echoes of violence ricocheted against stained glass windows not built to hold this kind of fear. It lasted only minutes, but those minutes stretched into eternity. And when silence finally fell, it wasn't the peace of prayer, it was the suffocating quiet of disbelief. The question began there in that silence. How could rage step so boldly into a house of God? And why here? Why them? Why this Sunday? The first minutes after the gunfire felt like a dream everyone wanted to wake from. The pews were scattered with shoes left behind in panic. A hymn book lay open on the carpet, pages trembling under the ceiling fan as if the music was still trying to escape. Children were being carried out, some screaming, some silent in shock, their mothers clutching them as if letting go would mean losing them too. Inside the chapel, Bishop Wrigley lay where he fell, blood soaking into the sleeves he had rolled up to serve. Ruth Ann Dyer's purse had tipped, spilling caramels across the aisle, little wrapped candies that looked almost absurd against the scene of devastation. The man in the heavy jacket, Caleb Shore, was finally pinned, his chest heaving, eyes wide not with triumph but with something closer to despair. He muttered words no one could understand, words drowned out by the sobs and cries echoing against the stained glass. And then came the sirens. The wail of them split the air outside, red and blue lights spilling across the church windows like a warning from heaven too late to stop what had already happened. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn, barking commands. The three men who had tackled Caleb released him slowly, backing away with trembling hands. Detective Mara Lang was among the first through the doors. She froze for half a second, just long enough to see the hymn book, the bishop, the candies on the floor, and then she went to work. Her voice was calm but urgent. Secure him, get medics in here, now. In those first frantic moments, everyone was searching for something. Answers, survivors, a way to make sense of how faith could shatter so suddenly. And yet, even as Caleb was dragged out in handcuffs, a more chilling question began to rise in whispers among the congregation. Was this random, or had someone inside been marked long before the first shot was fired? Outside the chapel, the scene was a chaos of sirens, radios, and paramedics working against time. Blankets were draped over shoulders, Roman IV lines threaded into veins, and children huddled against parents who couldn't yet find words to explain what they'd witnessed. But inside the command post hastily set up in the parking lot, Detective Mara Lang was already tugging at the threads of something darker. Witness statements trickled in, each detail adding unease instead of clarity. One mother swore she saw Caleb lock eyes with Bishop Wrigley just before the first shot. Another claimed he bypassed 3 pews of people without raising his weapon, moving straight toward the front as though searching for someone. A teenager remembered a muttered phrase, low, sharp, almost spat out, just before the chaos erupted. This didn't look like random rage anymore. It looked like a message. Mara flipped through her notebook, her pen tapping against the page. Targeted, she scribbled, but why him? Then came the whisper. An usher, pale and shaking, pulled her aside. His voice cracked as he spoke. He'd been here before, last week. He came to the office door after service, wanted to see the bishop. They didn't let him in. Mara froze. If that was true, then this wasn't just an outburst born in minutes. It was the echo of a grudge carried into sacred space. She closed the notebook slowly, eyes scanning the chapel doors, the shattered glass, the trail of blood leading down the aisle. And in that moment, one question pressed harder than all the others. Detective Mara Lang knew grief and anger often blurred in the hours after tragedy. But this case wasn't just grief, it was calculation. And the only way to untangle it was to step backward to Caleb Shore's life, his choices, and the silent cracks that had been spreading long before the gunfire. The council minutes told the first story. A week earlier, Caleb had stood in front of church leaders in a beige, walled room where the air always smelled faintly of coffee no one drank. They'd spoken to him about discipline, about faith, about the path forward. His responses had been clipped, teeth gritted between each word. When the letter of removal arrived, neighbors said they saw him pacing his porch for hours, whispering to no one but the night sky. In his apartment, Mara found the second story, the one written not in official minutes, but in the clutter of a small, lonely space. The fridge held little more than ketchup packets and an expired carton of milk. On the table, rows of note cards, each with phrases scratched in jittery ink. You can't silence me. I wanted someone to hear me. Pain deserves an echo. Some cards were crossed out. Others had tear stains warping the paper. And then there was one card, folded and tucked beneath the stack, with words that froze Mara's hand mid. Glove, Sunday, the bishop first. Then the sentence ended there, torn in half, as though Caleb himself had ripped it before deciding what would come next. Mara placed the card in an evidence bag, her pulse climbing. The room was no longer just a place of anger. It was a map of intent. And if that unfinished sentence was more than just a discarded thought, then Bishop Wrigley might not have been the only name Caleb carried into the chapel. As she switched off the apartment light, a single question lingered heavy in her chest. Who else was on his list? And how much time did they have left before the rest of the plan surfaced? The next lead came not from Caleb's apartment, but from a street corner 2 blocks from the chapel. A city worker had called it in, a stainless steel lamppost with a series of strange scratches at its base, as if someone had been carving letters into the metal. Detective Mara Lang crouched down, running her gloved fingers over the marks. At first, they looked like vandalism, nothing more, but under the harsh glare of a flashlight, the scratches revealed themselves, initials, M.W., and just below half-finished letters, R.A.D. Michael Wrigley. Ruth Ann Dyer, the names of the dead. It wasn't coincidence. Someone, very likely Caleb, had marked them there beforehand, almost like a rehearsal, a private promise to himself of what was to come. The lamppost stood across from the church parking lot, in clear line of sight of the chapel's front doors. He must have stood here at night, scratching into steel, testing the weight of his rage. Mara's stomach turned as she photographed the evidence. It wasn't just an attack, it was ritualized, premeditated, and worse, it hinted there might be more names, more letters, waiting to be carved into the world. Back at the station, she laid out the evidence in a slow, deliberate order. The council letter, the note cards, the torn sentence, and now the lamppost. Piece by piece, it spelled out a plan that hadn't ended in the chapel. And yet, something even darker lurked at the edges of her discovery. One of the witnesses, a teenage boy who had seen Caleb pacing in the days before, mentioned something that hadn't yet appeared in the evidence log. He kept saying Monday. The boy whispered, like, Monday was the real day, this was just practice. Mara felt the chill press down her spine. If the attack on Sunday was just the beginning, then Eagle Creek hadn't seen the last of Caleb Shore's plan. It was a tip from a clerk that cracked open the next chapter. A storage facility near the Eagle Creek River, rows of corrugated doors stretching into silence, bills paid in cash by a man who rarely spoke more than 3 words at the counter. The name on the lease, Caleb Shore. Detective Mara Lang arrived with a search warrant in hand and a knot tightening in her chest. The river air carried the smell of rust and algae, the water rushing unseen just beyond the chain link fence. As the bolt cutters snapped and the heavy lock clattered to the ground, the air inside the unit rushed out, cold, stale, metallic. What they found was not chaos, but order, chilling, meticulous order. Plastic tubs stacked neatly, each labeled in blocky handwriting, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Inside the first bin, church programs, crumpled drafts of letters, and empty shell casings, evidence of what had already happened. But the second bin, Monday, held something far worse. A crude map of the town, circles drawn around schools, offices, and even the very courthouse where Caleb now sat awaiting arraignment. Each circle carried initials, some familiar, some not yet connected, pinned to the wall of the Yun. It was a piece of paper torn from a spiral notebook. On it, written in jagged strokes, Sunday proved they'll listen, Monday makes them remember. The officers exchanged a look, their faces blanched under the fluorescent light. This wasn't the aftermath of a single act. It was the blueprint of something larger, something that hadn't yet been stopped. Mara held the map in her hands, her throat tightening as she read each circle, each set of initials. She didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the thought cut sharper than any evidence bag could hold. If Caleb's plan had been interrupted on Sunday, who was meant to pay on Monday? And the worst part, the initials on the page didn't stop at 2 names. They ran down the paper in a list that seemed to promise there were more lives still in the crosshairs. The bins and the map had been shocking enough, but it was the small, black external hard drive tucked into a corner that froze Detective Mara Lang in place. Its label was crude, scrawled in white paint marker, Cam Backup. The tech team hooked it up in the station's evidence lab later that night. What they expected were ordinary security feeds, maybe Caleb's attempt to record his movements around the church, maybe footage he'd stolen to relive the attack. What they found was stranger. The files were organized by date, each folder meticulously labeled. The first few contained standard security footage, grainy views of the church parking lot, hallways, and even the chapel doors. But when Mara clicked deeper, she noticed something unsettling, angles that shouldn't exist. One clip showed the interior of the chapel from high in a corner, looking down at pews and pulpit, but the church had no cameras inside. Another clip showed Caleb walking through the side doors of the building at night, testing the locks. But the footage wasn't handheld. It was steady, framed as if shot by someone else. Who was filming this? Mara muttered under her breath. Her team exchanged glances. If Caleb wasn't working alone, if someone else had been documenting his steps, then Eagle Creek's nightmare wasn't contained in a single arrest. It was still out there, watching, recording. One final file, buried at the bottom of the drive, sent a chill through the room. The screen flickered, then stabilized on an empty hallway inside the church. A timestamp ran across the bottom, Monday, 8:03 a.m. The camera remained fixed, waiting, but Monday had never come. Caleb had been arrested on Sunday, which meant this footage wasn't a record of something past. It was a plan for something that hadn't yet happened. Mara shut the laptop, her pulse hammering in her ears. For the first time since the attack, the question wasn't just why Caleb did it. It was who else had been standing in the shadows with him, and how much of the plan was still alive. Detective Mara Lang barely had time to process the CM backup footage before her phone rang. Dispatch, voice sharp with urgency. Possible threat, downtown, reports of a man matching Caleb's description seen near the courthouse. Armed, Mara froze. Caleb was in custody, shackled, surrounded by deputies, which meant only one thing. Someone else was out there, moving his plan forward. The team mobilized, sirens ripping through the quiet streets of Eagle Creek. Officers in tactical vests swarmed the courthouse steps, civilians spilling onto sidewalks in confusion. Parents clutched children. Cars honked as traffic jammed from the sudden blockade. Mara arrived and scanned the crowd, heart pounding. Every man in a dark jacket looked like a suspect. Every bag could be a weapon, and in her ears, the echo of Caleb's unfinished note, Sunday. The bishop first, then pushed her pulse higher. On the second floor of the courthouse, a janitor reported seeing a figure slip into an unlocked office moments before the police arrived. The door was forced open, but the room was empty, except for a folded piece of paper on the desk. Mara picked it up with gloved hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Caleb's, "You thought it ended with me, but Monday doesn't wait." The words rattled through her like a cold wind. Whoever had carried out this next step wasn't improvising. They were following a script Caleb had already written. And then came the call from another officer across town. A second sighting, another man, same jacket, same stillness in his walk, heading toward the elementary school. Mara's chest went tight. The courthouse was a diversion. Monday had arrived early, and its true target was already in motion. By the time officers swarmed the elementary school, the man in the dark jacket had already vanished into the tree line. Footprints in soft dirt led nowhere, circling back, overlapping, a trail designed to confuse. At the same moment, another call came in, a third sighting, this time near the transit hub, where buses idled and commuters clustered, and then a fourth, 4 men, 4 shadows, all moving differently, all carrying themselves with that same unnatural calm. The town of Eagle Creek seemed to be filling with ghosts. Detective Mara Lang stood at the command post, radios spitting static, dispatchers trying to stitch chaos into order. Her mind ran back to the hard drive labeled CM Backup. The footage, the steady framing, the unseen camera operator. She had assumed it meant an accomplice, but what if it meant more than one? What if Caleb hadn't been planning alone, but recruiting? The courthouse, the school, the transit hub. Every location circled on Caleb's map suddenly came alive, as though the ink on his page had spilled out into the streets. The unit by the river hadn't been storage. It had been strategy. Mara pressed her palms against the table, steadying herself against the hum of radios. If these were decoys designed to stretch the police thin, then somewhere in the town, hidden in plain sight, was the real strike. And as she traced her eyes across Caleb's map again, her gaze froze on one circle she hadn't considered until now. It wasn't the school, it wasn't the courthouse, it wasn't the buses. It was a small nursing home on the edge of town, the place where Caleb's mother had lived and where bitterness had first rooted itself years before. Mara's chest went cold. The decoys weren't just random. They were a cover for something deeply personal. And while officers chased shadows, the true target might already be waiting in silence. The nursing home sat at the far edge of Eagle Creek, where the river bent wide and the roads narrowed into gravel. A quiet place, surrounded by trees and silence, meant for peace. But Detective Mara Lang knew peace had no place here tonight. Caleb's map had circled it in thick black ink, initials scrawled beside it, S. His mother, Margaret Shore. Inside, the halls smelled of disinfectant and lavender. Elderly residents shuffled slowly with walkers, unaware of the storm gathering outside. Nurses whispered nervously as tactical officers swept through, securing doors and windows. Mara moved fast, her eyes sharp, her pulse pounding. She found Margaret's room near the back. A frail woman sat in a recliner, staring at the muted glow of a television. On the nightstand, and a photograph in a cracked frame, a much younger Caleb, awkward smile, standing beside her in front of the same Mormon church that now bore bloodstains on its carpet. "He blames me, doesn't he?" Margaret said softly when Mara entered. Her voice trembled but carried no surprise. "He always blamed me." Mara crouched beside her. "Blamed you for what?" "For staying here," Margaret whispered. for letting them take him in, then push him out. He thought this place, this church, was our inheritance, our name, our worth. When he lost it, he believed I chose them over him. On the dresser was an envelope, addressed in Caleb's uneven handwriting, for Mother. Inside, a letter scrawled in rage. You taught me God lived in those walls. You let them judge me. You let them strip me of the only family I had left. This is on you. When the world remembers, they'll remember your name too. Mara's chest tightened. This wasn't just about faith or punishment. It was about legacy, about a son trying to carve his mother's shame into the town itself. And then one of the officers called from the hallway. They had found something in the basement utility room. A duffel bag, heavy, wires visible through the partially open zipper. Mara's blood ran cold. Caleb hadn't only left his rage behind, he had left his inheritance in the form of fire. The clock was ticking. The duffel bag sat heavy on the basement floor, wires spilling like veins across the concrete. A red light blinked faintly from beneath the zipper, steady as a heartbeat. Clear the building, Mara barked, her voice cutting through the narrow hallways above. Nurses scrambled, wheeling residents out into the night air. Orderlies pushed beds on squeaking wheels. Children of visiting families clutched their grandparents' hands, the procession looking like an exodus from a war zone. Downstairs, the bomb squad arrived, their gear clattering as they assessed the device. It wasn't crude. It was deliberate. Packets of chemical accelerants were taped around a core charge, rigged with a digital timer. Whoever assembled it knew enough to make it count, and then Mara saw the note taped to the inside flap of the duffel bag. Drains carry everything away, memories, blood, even guilt. When this place burns, the town will know nothing survives its inheritance. Her breath caught. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a message written in fire. Caleb wanted his mother's shame, his own anger, the church's rejection, all of it to spill out in smoke and ash. The squad leader worked fast, calling out codes and instructions. Sweat ran down his temple beneath the helmet. Each second ticked louder in Mara's ears, as if the whole building had become one giant clock. Upstairs, Margaret Shore refused to leave her room. Nurses begged, but she shook her frail head. "This was meant for me," she whispered. "If it takes me, maybe it will end." Mara stormed into the room, her voice low but fierce. "No, it ends here because we end it. You don't get to give him that victory." Back in the basement, the bomb squad made their move, cutting, isolating, diffusing. One wire, then another, and then silence. The light blinked once more, then went dark. The room exhaled. The danger had passed for now. But as Mara stared at the disarmed device, her relief was short-lived. Because on the inside of the timer box, etched into the plastic, were more initials. Not just Margaret's, not just the bishop's. 3 more names, 3 more targets. The drain hadn't emptied yet. The device at the nursing home had been neutralized, but the initials carved inside its casing refused to let the relief last. 3 more names. 3 more shadows of people who didn't even know they'd been written into Caleb's manifesto. Back at the command post, Mara spread the evidence across the table. The map, the note cards, the storage bins, the cam backup files, and now the bomb's initials. It looked less like a single crime and more like a clockwork design. Each piece pointed to something unfinished. One of the tech analysts traced Caleb's digital footprint. He used an auto-scheduler. The analyst said, scrolling through lines of code, "Emails queued to go out at midnight tonight. The subject line is the same on all of them, reset Monday." Mara leaned closer. Who are they sent to? Random townspeople, church leaders, even media contacts. What's inside? The analyst clicked one open. The body of the email was a chilling countdown. Sunday was the beginning. Monday resets what you thought was safe. If you move forward, I move faster. If you think it's over, you've already lost. Attached to each email was a different file from the CM backup drive. Grainy videos, eerie stills of empty hallways, close-up shots of church pews, schoolyards, even the courthouse steps. It was psychological warfare, designed to keep the town paralyzed, braced for an attack they couldn't see. Mara realized what Caleb had built, Not just a plan for destruction, but a reset button on fear. Every time the town thought it was safe, Monday would come again. Another threat, another shadow, another whisper of what might happen next. It was a cycle with no natural ending. Caleb hadn't wanted a single act of violence. He had wanted to rewrite the calendar itself, to trap Eagle Creek in an endless Monday of dread. And as the analyst's voice trailed off, another officer hurried into the room, his face pale. "There's a problem," he said. "One of the emails didn't wait until midnight. It's already gone out." The subject line on the printout he handed Mara was short, sharp, and final. "The fourth shadow has a name." Monday dawned not with sunlight, but with the shrill cry of sirens. The first Reset Monday email had already made its way across Eagle Creek. Church leaders, local reporters, and ordinary townspeople awoke to subject lines that felt like a countdown. "The fourth shadow has a name." Phones buzzed in kitchens. Screens lit up on bedside tables. Children overheard fragments of conversation, targets, maps, shadows, and their eyes widened with a fear they didn't yet know how to name. By mid-morning, the soundscape of the town had changed. School alarms blared as teachers hurried children into lockdown drills that felt too real. The courthouse triggered its emergency siren, echoing through downtown. The nursing home, still shaken from the night before, locked its doors, residents pressing their faces to windows in silent confusion. What Caleb hadn't managed with bullets or bombs, he now achieved with a handful of scheduled emails. Fear became the weapon, and it needed no trigger finger. Detective Mara Lang stood in the Emergency Operations Center, watching maps fill with red markers. False reports, panicked calls, sightings of men in jackets that turned out to be joggers, delivery drivers, harmless strangers. But each one could be the fourth shadow. Each one could be the real threat. Her phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "He isn't finished. Look at the clock." Mara glanced at the wall. 10:59 a.m. And then, as the town's alarms screamed into the sky, the courthouse clock tower began to chime 11. Each toll felt like a hammer on bone. With every strike, a question pounded harder in Mara's mind. Was this the hour Caleb's reset finally became real? Or just another layer in a game designed to drive Eagle Creek mad? The answer was coming, and fast. In the days that followed, Eagle Creek lived beneath a sky heavy with sirens that no longer sounded. The alarms had faded, but the echo of them lived in every sudden noise, every glance at a dark jacket in a crowded street. Church doors reopened slowly, services held in voices that quivered on hymns. Parents hesitated at school drop-offs, holding their children's hands just a little longer, and the courthouse clock, once trusted to mark the calm rhythm of the town, now felt like a reminder of how quickly time could turn against them. Detective Mara Lang tried to close her files, but the case refused to settle. Caleb's writings, his Reset Monday obsession, his maps, his recordings, still floated in her mind like unfinished sentences. She knew justice in the courtroom was coming, but justice in the heart of a community was more fragile, harder to hold. Then, 3 nights later, while cataloging the last of the storage unit evidence, a technician handed her a thin manila envelope. It had been wedged inside the hard drive casing, hidden beneath the label CM Backup. Inside was a single Polaroid. The image was of the Eagle Creek Chapel, taken at night. Its windows glowed faintly, the lamppost with carved initials just visible at the edge of the frame. And in the foreground, unmistakable despite the grain, stood Caleb, but he wasn't alone. Another figure loomed half in shadow beside him. Face obscured, shoulders squared, holding the camera as though passing it back for the shot. Written across the bottom in Caleb's jagged hand, "The fourth shadow watches still." Mara stared at the photo, her pulse steady but cold. Caleb was behind bars, his plans were dismantled, and yet the evidence in her hands whispered a darker truth. The inheritance of fear wasn't ending. It was still out there, breathing, watching, waiting. And Eagle Creek would never again know a Sunday that didn't feel just a little too much like Monday. Thank you for watching this episode of Murder Book 360. If this story shook you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Caleb acted alone, or does the fourth shadow still haunt Eagle Creek? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next case we uncover. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the darkest crimes are often hiding in plain sight.